All right, hello everybody, look where we are. That's the ocean that's covered by a thick cloud layer. And Leia's here. Anyway, we're gonna read George MacDonald's book. I've got happiness on my shirt and I've got a mic today so I can move the camera wherever. And so anyway, we're gonna read George MacDonald's book again where he was the spiritual mentor of C.S. Lewis. C.S. Lewis said every book he ever wrote, he quoted either directly or indirectly from George MacDonald. And so he's a profound spiritual writer, and a lot of people might miss this just on the surface because it just sounds like a story about a mute boy back in some part of Scotland in the 1800s. But anyway, there are just profound truths revealed in this story as you listen. And so I'll just do my best, and here we go. All right. Yeah. All right, let's start. I do this, if you've been around, to show people we're starting. All right. I've got this stick sticking into me. We've got it? All right. Now, we were on the chapter called Initiation. So Gibbie just found out that he gets an inheritance from a relative. And so he agreed to go with this Mr. Sclater guy if he could bring Donald, his brother, because these people adopted him, Janet and Robert. They're a simple couple. All right. Good girl. She's so sweaty, or whatever it's called. Not sweaty, but panting. It was a very long trek in the heat today. You got it, girl. We made it. Okay. All right, let's start. But Mrs. Sclater, so Mr. Sclater is a pastor type, and he, I'm going to put my hat on. He found out about the inheritance. He married this woman, Mrs. Sclater, she's Mrs. Sclater now, who was a widow before, who had a large inheritance herself. And so you'll see what happens with him. Anyway, but Mrs. Sclater soon began to find that even in regard to social externals, she could never have had a readier pupil. He watched her so closely and with such an appreciation of the difference in things of the kind between her and her husband, that for a short period he was in danger of falling into habits of movement and manipulation too dainty for a man, a fault happily none the less objectionable in the eyes of his instructress. So she's teaching him about manners, and Mr. Sclater is going to make sure that he has an education. That she, on her own part, carried the feminine a little beyond the limits of the natural. But here also she found him so readily set right that she imagined she was going to do anything with him she pleased, and was not a little proud of her conquest. And the power she had over the young savage. They thought he was a savage just because he couldn't speak, right? He can hear, but he can't speak. He's mute. If you're just coming in now, don't even worry about it at all. Just trust. I always trust that God brings you places for a reason. You're matching this part of the story right now is mirroring some part of your life for you. And the Holy Spirit, whether you're a Christian or not, will speak to you. God is our Father. He always wants to speak to us. All right, so I welcome all people. She had yet to discover that Gibbie had his own ideas too, that it was the general noble teachableness and affection of his nature that had brought about so speedy an understanding between them in everything wherein he saw she could show him the better way, but that nowhere else would he feel bound or inclined to follow her injunctions. Wow. Much and strongly as he was drawn to her by her ladyhood, and the sense she gave him of refinement and familiarity with the niceties, he had no feeling that she had authority over him. So neglected in his childhood, so absolutely trusted by the cottagers, who had never found in him the slightest occasion for the exercise of authority, he had not an idea of owing obedience to any but the one. That's with a capital O, God. Gifted from the first, with a heart of devotion, the will of the master set the will of the boy upon the throne of service, and what he had done from inclination he was now capable of doing against it, and would most assuredly do against it if ever occasion should arise. What other obedience was necessary to his perfection? For his father and mother and Donald he had reverence, profound and tender, and for no one else as yet among men. That's Donald's parents, Janet and Robert, that I said earlier had adopted him. As he was a foundling, both his parents had died, and they found him, earlier in the story. You can read about that, listen to it, or read. I put the PDF in the link. So nowadays you can just drop a PDF into Google Translator. It will translate it into your own language if you're watching the captions here. There's little bees right next to me on the flowers. I want more of the ocean when it comes. Hold on, I had a rock over here. I see one down there, but I don't want to. This will work. There. So, it says, for his father and mother and Donald, he had reverence, profound and tender, and for no one else as yet among men, but at the same time, something far beyond respect for every human shape and show. He could not make any of the social distinctions which to Mr. and Mrs. Sclater seemed to belong to existence itself, and their recognition essential to the living of their lives, whence it naturally resulted that, upon occasion, he seemed to them devoid of the first rudiments of breeding, without respect, or any notion of subordination. So they took it as him not subordinating, that he didn't see. Earlier, last time we ended with this part of the story, where he took the jacket off of his back and gave it to this little boy who had no jacket and seemed like homeless like he was before. And so he's not going to judge people by their external appearance or the class system that was going on at that time. And so they looked at it like, oh, he's not in subordination to us in that area. And it's like, no, that's just silly. Mr. Sclater was conscientious in his treatment of him. The very day following that of their arrival, he set to work with him. He had been a tutor, was a good scholar, and a sensible teacher, and soon discovered how to make the most of Gibbie's facility in writing. He was already possessed of a little Latin. Donald, I'm sure, taught him that, right? And after having for some time accustomed him to translate from each language into the other, the minister began to think it might be of advantage to learning in general if at least half the boys and girls at school and 3 parts of every Sunday congregation were as dumb as Sir Gilbert Galbraith. Okay, so what did he just say? He said, so here he is translating from Latin to other languages, to each language to the other. The minister began to think it might be of advantage to learning in general if at least half the boys and girls at school and 3 parts of every Sunday congregation was as dumb as Sir Gilbert Galbraith. Okay, they all thought he was dumb, but maybe he's saying was not able to speak, like their learning would be as profound as his. But anyway, when at length he set him to Greek, he was astonished at the avidity with which he learned it. He had hardly got him over tupto. It's in Greek, but I took Greek. It's this word, tupto, but I don't know what it means in Greek. I forgot what that word he'll say, maybe. When he found him one day so intent upon the Greek Testament, that's the Greek New Testament. Jesus and the disciples spoke in Aramaic and Greek. That was a common language because Rome was in there at the time. And so the New Testament was written in Aramaic and translated into Greek or written in Greek and Aramaic. I think written in Greek and Aramaic. Hold on, let me get this. Oh, good girl, good girl. Keep sleeping, it's fine. Getting these flies out of the way. Okay, anyway. Wow. So he had hardly, and he found him one day so intent upon the Greek Testament that exceptionally keen of hearing as he was quite unaware that anyone had entered the room. What Gibbie made of Mr. Sclater's prayers, either in congregational or family devotion, I am at some loss to imagine. Wow. So he's a minister. So he's listening to his prayers, and of course, we don't compare it to other people, but all he had before was Janet's sincere prayers, where she just was speaking as if Jesus was standing right in front of her, sitting with her and caring intimately. So that's all he knew on the mountain with the shepherd, Robert's a shepherd. Anyway. What Gibbie made of Mr. Sclater's prayers, either in congregational or family devotion, I am at some loss to imagine. Beside his memories of the direct, fervid outpouring and appeal of Janet, in which she seemed to talk face to face with God, they must have seemed to him like the utterances of some curiously constructed wooden automaton, doing its best to pray, without any soul to be saved, any weakness to be made strong, any doubt to be cleared, any hunger to be filled. What can be less like religion than the prayers of a man whose religion is his profession, and who, if he were not, quote, in the church, would probably never pray at all? Gibbie, however, being the reverse of critical, that's so good. Thank you, God, help us not be critical, must, I can hardly doubt, have seen in them a good deal more than was there, a pitiful faculty to the man who cultivates that of seeing in everything less than is there. Wow. Wow. Holy God, help us. Help us to see more than is there. Bless you. To Mrs. Sclater, it was at first rather depressing, and for a time grew more and more painful to have a live silence by her side. But when she came into rapport with the natural utterance of the boy, his presence grew more like a constant speech, and that which was best in her was not unfrequently able to say for the boy what he would have said could he have spoken. The nobler part of her nature was in secret alliance with the thoughts and feelings of Gibbie. But this relation between them, though perceptible, did not become at all plain to her until after she had established more definite means of communication. Gibbie, for his part, full of the holy simplicities of the cottage, had a good many things to meet which disappointed, perplexed, and shocked him. Middling good people are shocked at the wickedness of the wicked. Gibbie, who knew both so well, and what ought to be expected, was shocked only at the wickedness of the righteous. He never came quite to understand Mr. Sclater. The inconsistent never can be understood. Oh, wow! Did you see that? A hummingbird came right in front of us. Wow. I thought it was like a giant bee, but it was a hummingbird right in front of me. Right here. It was right here. Wow. Maybe the sun will clear out all of that fog on the water. Oh, well, I don't know how to get this. I forgot, I can just do this. But that's not, okay, hold on, I need to tilt it this way. All right, that's good. I think I'll lower it again a little. Okay. So, he was shocked only at the wickedness of the righteous, quote, righteous, you know what I mean? He doesn't say quote, but he never came quite to understand Mr. Sclater. The inconsistent never can be understood. That only which has absolute reason in it can be understood of men. There is a bewilderment about the very nature of evil, which only he who made us capable of evil, that we might be good, can comprehend. Wow. Well, then leave it to God. Okay, chapter XLII. I forgot what that is. 42, I think. Donald's lodging. That's what this chapter is called. Donald had not accompanied Mr. Sclater and his ward, as he generally styled him, to the city, but continued at the Mains until another herd boy should be found to take his place. All were sorry to part with him, but no one desired to stand in the way of his good fortune by claiming his service to the end of his half-year. It was about a fortnight after Gibbie's departure when he found himself free. His last night he spent with his parents on Glashgar, and the next morning set out in the moonlight to join the coach with some cakes and a bit of fresh butter tied up in a cotton handkerchief. He wept at leaving them, nor was too much excited with the prospect before him to lay up his mother's parting words in his heart. For it is not every son that will not learn of his mother. He who will not goes to the school of Gideon. Wow. So it's important for us to honor our mother and father in the way God shows us to. The last words of Janet to her Donald were, "Now mind your something straw, a straw dried on its root, but a growing stalk at the main must look to its corn." I don't know what it means. I'll have to, maybe we can look it up. Here, I'll let you look at it. It's in Scottish. Anyway, I have it on Audible with a guy that translates it, I think. Or no, maybe Kindle I do. Anyway, whatever. When he reached the spot appointed, there already was the cart from the Mains with his kist. I don't know what a kist is, but probably a trunk, containing all his earthly possessions. They did not half fill it, and would have tumbled about in the great chest, had not the bounty of Mistress Jean complemented its space with provision, a cheese, a bag of oatmeal, some oatcakes, and a pound or two of the best butter in the world. For now that he was leaving them, a herd boy no more, but a collegianeer, and going to be a gentleman, it was right to be liberal. The box, whose ponderosity was unintelligible to its owner, having been hoisted amid the smiles of the passengers to the mid-region of the roof of the coach, Donald clambered after it, and took for the first time in his life his place behind 4 horses, to go softly, rushing through the air towards endless liberty. It was to the young poet an hour of glorious birth, in which there seemed nothing too strange, nothing but what should have come. I fancy when they die, many will find themselves more at home than ever they were in this world. But Donald is not the subject of my story, and I must not spend upon him. I will only say that his feelings on this grand occasions were the less satisfactory to himself, that, not being poet merely, but philosopher as well, he sought to understand them. The mere poet, the man-bird, would have been content with them in themselves. But if he who is both does not rise above both by learning obedience, he will have a fine time of it between them. Wow. The streets of the city at length received them with noise and echo. At the coach office, Mr. Sclater stood waiting, welcomed him with dignity rather than kindness, right? Because he looked at him as lower class, of course. Well, we'll see, but anyway. Hired a porter with his truck, whom he told where to take the chest, said Sir Gilbert would doubtless call on him the next day, and left him with the porter. It was a cold afternoon, the air half mist, half twilight. Donald followed the rattling, bumping truck over the stones, walking closely behind it, almost in the gutter. They made one turning, went a long way through the narrow, sometimes crowded, Whitty Hill, and stopped. The man opened a door, returned to the truck, and began to pull the box from it. Donald gave him effective assistance, and they entered with it between them. There was just light enough from a tallow candle with a wick, like a red-hot mushroom, to see that they were in what appeared to Donald a house in most appalling disorder, but was in fact a furniture shop. The porter led the way up a dark stair, and Donald followed with his end of the trunk. At the top was a large room into which the last of the day glimmered through the windows, covered with the smoke and dust of years, showing this also full of furniture, chiefly old. A lane through the furniture led along the room to a door at the other end. To Donald's eyes it looked a dreary place, but when the porter opened the other door, he saw a neat little room with a curtained bed. Oh, that's awesome. A carpeted floor, a fire burning in the grate, a kettle on the hob, and the table laid for tea. This was like a bit of a palace, for he had never in his life even looked into such a chamber. The porter set down his end of the chest and said, "Good night to you," and walked out, leaving the door open. Wow. Good girl. You gotta look at Leia. She's so cute. Just laying here in the shade. So amazing out here. I forget to stop sometimes and just look without naming it, you know? Knowing nothing about towns and the ways of them, Donald was yet a little surprised that there was nobody to receive him. He approached the fire and sat down to warm himself, taking care not to set his hobnailed shoes on the grandeur of the little hearthrug. A few moments, and he was startled by a slight noise as of suppressed laughter. He jumped up. One of the curtains of his bed was strangely agitated. Out leaped Gibbie from behind it and threw his arms about him. This is his brother now, you know. "Ah, creature, you gave me such a flag." I don't know what that is, but such a fright, right? Said Donald. "But Losh, they have gone and made a gentleman of you already," he added, holding him at arm's length and regarding him with wonder and admiration. A notable change had indeed passed upon Gibbie, mere externals considered, in that fortnight. He was certainly not so picturesque as before, yet the alteration was entirely delightful to Donald. Perhaps he felt it gave a good hope for the future of his own person. Mrs. Sclater had had his hair cut. His shirt was of the whitest of linen, his necktie of the richest of black silk, his clothes were of the newest cut and best possible fit, and his boots perfect. The result was altogether even to her satisfaction. In one thing only was she foiled. She could not get him to wear gloves. He had put on a pair, but found them so miserably uncomfortable, that in merry wrath he pulled them off on the way home and threw them. "The best kid," exclaimed Mrs. Sclater, "over the Pearl Bridge." All right. Prudently fearful of overstraining her influence, she yielded for the present and let him go without gloves, you know. Mr. Sclater also had hitherto exercised prudence in his demands upon Gibbie. Not that he desired anything less than unlimited authority with him, because when you're in egotism, you get off on power. You try to get it in every chance you can, and, labeling yourself as better than others and lording yourself over others. And God, just keep us from ego, gosh. We can be an ego by acting like we're not an ego, and they are. So it's like, I was getting that verse on the way up here. Don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. I think that's how it is. One of them. Anyway, but I read in my commentary from the 1100s, it says, don't let, your vainglory know how your right hand is giving to the poor or whatever, or being kind. Just don't let it know that. Or it gets puffed up, you keep feeding that part. Anyway, that's Blessed Theophylact from the 1100s. He studied the church fathers before that. Mr. Sclater also had hitherto exercised prudence in his demands upon Gibbie, not that he desired anything less than unlimited authority with him, but, knowing it would be hard to enforce, he sought to establish it by a gradual tightening of the rein, a slow encroachment of law upon the realms of disordered license. He had never yet refused to do anything he required of him, had executed entirely the tasks he set him, was more than respectful and always ready, yet somehow Mr. Sclater could never feel that the lad was exactly obeying him. He thought it over, but could not understand it and did not like it, for he was fond of authority. Gibbie, in fact, did whatever was required of him, for he was required of him from his own delight in meeting the wish expressed, not from any sense of duty or of obligation to obedience. The minister had no perception of what the boy was, and but a very small capacity for appreciating what was best in him, and had a foreboding suspicion that the time would come when they would differ. He had not told him that he was going to meet the coach, but Gibbie was glad to learn from Mrs. Sclater that such was his intention, for he preferred meeting Donald at his lodging. He had recognized the place at once from the minister's mention of it to his wife, having known the shop and its owner since ever he could remember himself. He loitered near until he saw Donald arrive, then crept after him and the porter up the stairs. Hold on, there's all these bugs. And when Donald sat down by the fire, got into the room behind the curtain. The boys had then a jolly time of it. They made their tea, for which everything was present, and ate as boys know how, Donald enjoying the rarity of the white bread of the city, Gibbie, who had not tasted oatmeal since he came, devouring mother's cakes. When they had done, Gibbie, who had learned much since he came, looked about the room till he found a bell rope and pulled it, whereupon the oddest-looking old woman, not a hair altered from what Gibbie remembered her, entered, and with friendly chatter proceeded to remove the tray. Suddenly something arrested her, and she began to regard Gibbie with curious looks. In a moment she was sure of him, and a torrent of exclamations and reminiscences and appeals followed, which lasted, the two lads now laughing, now all but crying, for nearly an hour, while all the time the old woman kept doing and undoing about the hearth and the tea table. Donald asked many questions about his friend, and she answered freely, except as often as one approached his family, when she would fall silent and bustle about as if she had not heard. Then Gibbie would look thoughtful and strange and a little sad, and a faraway gaze would come into his eyes as if he were searching for his father in the other world. His father died of whiskey, of alcoholism, and his mother died shortly after his childbirth in this story. When the good woman at length, I'm just telling you that that's not written here in case you haven't been here for the beginning of the story. I just let you in on that. When the good woman at length left them, they uncorded Donald's kiss, discovered the cause of its portentous weight, took out everything, put the provisions in a cupboard, arranged the few books, and then sat down by the fire for a read together. The hours slipped away. It was night, and still they sat and read. It must have been after 10 o'clock when they heard footsteps coming through the adjoining room. The door opened swiftly. In walked Mr. Sclater and closed it behind him. His look was angry, severe enough for boys caught card playing or drinking or reading something that was not divinity on a Sunday. Gibbie had absented himself without permission, had stayed away for hours, had not returned even when the hour of worship arrived. I don't know if that's evening prayer or something, I don't know. Let's see. And these were sins against the respectability of his house, which no minister like Mr. Sclater could pass by. It mattered nothing what they were doing. It was all one when it got to midnight. And it became reveling and was sinful and dangerous, vulgar and ungentlemanly, giving the worst possible examples to those beneath them, even though they're probably reading something, that was like, so edifying. Anyway. What could their landlady think the very first night, and a lodger whom she had recommended? Such was the sort of thing with which Mr. Sclater overwhelmed the two boys. Donald would have pleaded in justification or at least excuse, but he silenced him peremptorily. I suspect there had been some difference between Mrs. Sclater and him just before he left. How otherwise could he have so entirely forgotten his wise resolves anent Gibbie's gradual subjugation? So he was planning to gradually subjugate him, but here all of a sudden, our ego tells on itself, if you will. I gotta just make sure my camera's still going. When first he entered, Gibbie rose with his usual smile of greeting and got him a chair, but he waved aside the attention with indignant indifference and went on with his foolish reproof, unworthy of record. Good, so they're not going to write it here, except for Gibbie's following behavior. Beaten down by the suddenness of the storm, Donald had never risen from his chair, but sat glowering into the fire. He was annoyed, vexed, half ashamed with the readiness of the poetic nature to fit itself to any position, especially one suggested by an unjust judgment. He felt, with the worthy parson thus storming at him, almost as if guilty in everything laid to their joint charge, even though they weren't. If a minister comes in and starts saying this stuff, and you haven't been there before, that's why it confuses us, right? Evil confuses us, because we're not meant to understand it, but God understands, because he's above all of it. Good girl. Gibbie on his feet looked the minister straight in the face. His smile of welcome, which had suddenly mingled itself with bewilderment, gradually faded into one of concern, then of pity, and by degrees died away altogether, leaving in its place a look of question. More and more settled, his countenance grew, while all the time he never took his eyes off Mr. Sclater's until its expression at length was that of pitiful, unconscious reproof, mingled with sympathetic shame. He had never met anything like that before, nothing low like this, for all injustice, and especially all that sort of thing which Janet called dinging the motes with the beam, is eternally low. And so Jesus says to take out the beam in your own eye, and then you will see the speck. Then you can help remove the speck out of your brother's eye. But this is what Janet calls dinging the motes with the beam. So you're taking your own sin and your own egotism, your own ways of operating, and projecting it onto other people. I was praying once at a church for someone who died, and I got the strangest vision. I don't know why God allowed it, but anyway, I won't go into it. I'll just say it's as if the person was saying, I'm sorry, I so misjudged you. You're not ever meant to seek out the dead, because then we try to seek out all of those that we lost in our loneliness and grief. But I was just praying for his soul, because we were taught to do that at our church. And but the person, I think, had done so. I might find out later in my life how he had misjudged me. But, I had forgiven him. I didn't, whatever, I know that God can correct anything. But anyway, so when you're just looking after money or your own, or, your own selfish wants or whatever they are, I don't know, then you just assume other people, when they're operating in a neutral way or a kind way or looking for something else, you imagine that they're operating in the same way that you're operating, just out for themselves in the same way that you have been. It's just training and programming, but God wants to break that off of us. Anyway, I hope I didn't say too much. I'm like, God, help me not say too much, not say too little. Anyway, so he says, nothing low like this, for all injustice, and especially all that sort of thing which Janet called dinging the motes with the beam, is eternally low. Had Gibbie seen in the holy temple of Glashgar, he'd never seen anything like this from Robert and Janet. He had no way of understanding or interpreting it, save by calling to his aid the sad knowledge of evil gathered in his earliest years. Except in the laird and Fergus and the gamekeeper, he had not, since fleeing from Lucky Kroll's Hoff, seen a trace of unreasonable anger in any one he knew. Robert or Janet had never scolded him. He might go and come as he pleased. The night was sacred as the day in that dear house. His father, even when most overcome by the wicked thing, had never scolded him. His father, even though he was an alcoholic and died of whiskey, never scolded him, but had love and compassion for him and knew him to be the good boy that he had been. Anyway, the boys remaining absolutely silent, the minister had it all his own way, but before he had begun to draw to a close across the blinding mists of his fog-breeding wrath, he began to be aware of the shining of the two heavenly lights, the eyes, namely, of the dumb boy fixed upon him. Dumb just meaning not being able to speak, how they say deaf and dumb back in the day. Deaf is not being able to hear, and dumb is not being able to speak. All right, it's not calling him dumb, but anyway. So the two heavenly lights, the eyes, namely, of the dumb boy fixed upon him, they jarred him a little in his onward course. They shook him as if with a doubt. The feeling, undefined, slowly grew to a notion, first obscure, then plain. They were eyes of reproof that were fastened upon him. At the first suspicion, his anger flared up more fierce than ever, but it was a flare of a doomed flame. Slowly the rebuke told was telling. The self-satisfied in the rightness, a very different thing from righteousness, of the man was sinking before the innocent difference of the boy. He began to feel awkward. He hesitated. He ceased. For the moment, Gibbie unconsciously had conquered without knowing it. He was the superior of the two, and Mr. Sclater had begun to learn that he could never exercise authority over him. But the worldly wise man will not seem to be defeated even when he knows he is. Wow. That's worth repeating 1,000,000 times. But the worldly wise man will not seem to be defeated even where he knows he is. If he do give in, he will make it look as if it came of the proper motion of his own goodness. After a slight pause, the minister spoke again, but with the changed tone of one who had an apology made to him, whose anger is appeased, and who therefore acts the Neptune over the billows of his own sea. That was the way he would slide out of it. Donald Grant, he said, you had better go to bed at once and get fit for your work tomorrow. I will go with you to call upon the principal. Take care you are not out of the way when I come for you. Get your cap, Sir Gilbert, and come. Mrs. Sclater was already very uneasy about you when I left her. Gibbie took from his pocket the little ivory tablets Mrs. Sclater had given him, wrote the following words, and handed them to the minister. Dear sir, I am going to sleep this night with Donald. The bed is big enough for 2. Good night, sir. For a moment, the minister's wrath seethed again, like a volcano, however, that has sent out a puff of steam, but holds back its lava. He thought better of it. Here was a chance of retiring with grace, in well-conducted retreat, instead of headlong rout. Then be sure you are home by lesson time, he said. Donald can come with you. Good night. Mind you don't keep each other awake. Donald said, good night, sir, and Gibbie gave him a serious and respectful nod. He left the room, and the boys turned and looked at each other. Donald's countenance expressed an indignant sense of wrong, but Gibbie's revealed a more profound concern. He stood motionless, intent on the receding steps of the minister. The moment the sound of them ceased, he darted soundless after him. Donald, who from Mr. Sclater's reply had understood what Gibbie had written, was astonished, and starting to his feet followed him. By the time he reached the door, Gibbie was past the second lamp, his shadow describing a huge half-circle around him. As he stole from lamp to lamp after the minister, keeping always a lamp-post still between them, when the minister turned a corner, Gibbie made a soundless dart to it and peeped round, lingered a moment looking, then followed again. On and on went Mr. Sclater, and on went Gibbie, careful constantly not to be seen by him, and on went Donald, careful to be seen of neither. They went a long way, as he thought, for to the country boy distance between houses seemed much greater than between dikes or hedges. At last the minister went up the steps of a handsome house, took a key from his pocket, and opened the door. From some impulse or other, as he stepped in, he turned sharp round and saw Gibbie. "Come in," he said, in a loud, authoritative tone, probably taking the boy's appearance for the effect of repentance and a desire to return to his own bed. Gibbie lifted his cap and walked quietly on towards the other end of Dower Street. Donald dared not follow, for Mr. Sclater stood between them, looking out. Presently, however, the door shut with a great bang, and Donald was after Gibbie like a hound. Donald turned a corner too, but it was a wrong corner. Concluding that Gibbie had turned another corner ahead of him, he ran on in vanishing hope of catching sight of him again. But he was soon satisfied he had lost him. Nor him only, but himself as well, for he had not the smallest idea how to return even as far as the minister's house. It rendered the matter considerably worse that, having never heard the name of the street where he lodged but once, when the minister gave direction to the porter, he had utterly forgotten it. All right. I don't know if they're talking anyway. Oh, good. I have my mic. Hopefully it just goes to my mic. Hello, everyone, again. All right. It rendered the matter so he had never... So there he was, out in the night, astray in the streets of a city, many tens of thousands, in which he had never till that day set foot, never before having been in any larger abode of men than a scattered village of thatched roofs. But he was not tired, and so long as a man is not tired, he can do well, even in pain. But a city is a dreary place at night, even to one who knows his way in it, much drearier to one lost, in some respects drearier than a heath, except there be old mine shafts in it, right, because you can fall asleep somewhere. It's as good as the birds a country had creeped until there bit eggs again, and the day was left bare a song, said the poet to himself. I don't know what he just said. Here, I'll put it here so you can read it yourself. It's right here. And always put it in the comments for us if you know the Scottish dialect, right? Night amongst houses was a new thing to him. Night on the hillside and in the fields he knew well, but this was like a place of tombs. What else, when all were dead for the night? The night is the world's graveyard, and the cities are its catacombs. He repeated to himself all his own few ballads, then repeated them aloud as he walked, indulging the fancy that he had a long audience on each side of him. But he dropped into silence the moment any night wanderer appeared. Presently he found himself on the shore of the river and tried to get to the edge of the water, but it was low tide. The lamps did not throw much light so far. The moon was clouded. He got among logs and mud and regained the street bemired and beginning to feel weary. He was saying to himself, whatever was he to do all the night long, when round a corner a little way off came a woman. It was no use asking counsel of her, however, or of anyone else, he thought, so long as he did not know even the name of the street he wanted, a street which, as he walked along it, had seemed interminable. Interminable, right? The woman drew near. She was rather tall, erect in the back, but bowed in the shoulders, with fierce black eyes, which were all that he could see of her face, for she had a little tartan shawl over her head, which she held together with one hand, while in the other she carried a basket. But those eyes were enough to make him fancy he must have seen her before. They were just passing each other under a lamp when she looked hard at him and stopped. "Man," she said, "I have seen you upon your face before." "I don't know that can be the case," answered Donald, "that you'll see upon them again." "Where come you from?" she asked. "That's what I would fain ask myself," he replied. Here, I'll put the conversation here. I'm just going to translate it as best I can as we go, because otherwise other people listening can't get it if I speak the slang anyways. He went on, "I fancy I have seen upon yours afore too, but I cannot well see your face. Where come you from?" "Know you the place they call Doorside?" she rejoined. "Doorside is a very long place," answered Donald, "and this must be the something of them I'm thinking." "You're not far wrong there," she returned, "and you have a gay tongue upon your head for a lad from Doorside. I never heard as tongues were cutting it shorter, nor their gates. But I don't mean you any offence. There's none taken, sir, nor likely to be," answered the woman. "Know you the place they call the Mains of Glashruach?" As she spoke, she let go her shawl, and it opened from her face like two curtains. He said, "Lord, it's the witch wife," cried Donald, retreating a pace in his astonishment. And the woman burst into a great laugh, a hard, unmusical, but not unmirthful. "Ah, gosh." "Aye," she said, "was that how the folks would have called me, right? It wasn't muckle wonder, for he came within through the water, yards deep, and had gone." She left on the Branner. She left. It was when there was this flood happening, and she came in, and they didn't know how she got there. And then she left on this floaty thing that this woman had made with her kids, because there was so much flood, and they didn't know how she got. But anyway, the woman burst into the laugh. And so anyway, "Well, it was the maddest thing," she returned with another laugh, which stopped abruptly. "I wouldn't like to do that again to save my life, but the mighty carried me through. And how's we, Sir Gibbie? Come in. I don't know your name, but we're just at the door of my bit garret," her little house, right? "Come quiet up the stairs and tell me about it." "Well, I wouldn't be sorry to rest for a bit, for I had tent myself altogether, and I'm pretty tired," answered Donald. "I but left the Mains 3 stream, maybe just yesterday," I think he's saying, "Come in and welcome, and when you rest and I'm rid of my basket, I'll soon put you to the gate of to the right house." Donald was too tired and too glad to be once more in the company of a human being to pursue further explanation at present. He followed her as quietly as he could up the dark stair. When she struck a light, he saw a little garret room, better than decently furnished. It seemed to the youth from the hills, though his mother would have thought it far from tidy. The moment the woman got a candle lighted, she went to a cupboard and brought thence a bottle and a glass. When Donald declined the whiskey she poured out, she seemed disappointed, and setting down the glass, let it stand. But when she had seated herself and began to relate her adventures in quest of Gibbie, she drew it towards her and sipped as she talked. Some day she would tell him, she said, the whole story of her voyage on the Brander, which would make him laugh, and it made her laugh, even now, when it came back to her in her bed at night, though she was far enough from laughing at the time, at the time of the storm. Then she told him a great deal about Gibbie and his father. "Ah, now," remarked Donald, "he'll be thinking it over again. He's going to be out looking for me, "Don't you trouble yourself about him," said the woman. "He knows the whole town well enough. As something knows the drains of it, as the water. Whatever the stream is knows the drains of it. But where did you put up?" she added, For it's time decent folk was gone to their beds. Donald explained that he knew neither the name of the street nor of the people where he was lodging. Tell me this or that, something, anything about the house and the folk, or what they're like, and maybe I'll know them, she said. But scarcely had he begun his description of the house, when she cried, Hout, man, it's lucky Murchisons ye are, and the woody hill. Come away, I'll take you there home in a jiffy. So saying, she rose, took the candle, showed him down the stair, and followed. It was past midnight, and the moon was down, but the street lamps were not yet extinguished, and they walked along without anything to interrupt their conversation, chiefly about Sir Gibbie and Sir George. But perhaps if Donald had known the cause of Gibbie's escape from the city and the dread thing that had taken place in the woman's house, he would not have walked quite so close to her. You can hear that at the beginning in the other stories. I'm so glad you're here today. Aren't you glad? Anyway, poor Mistress Croll, however, had been nowise to blame for that, and the shock it gave her had even done something to check the rate of her downhill progress. It let her see with a lightning flash from the pit, right? From the pit of hell, pretty much, because they acted in a murderous way. Anyway, it showed her how wide the rent now yawned between her and her formal respectability. She continued, as we know, to drink whiskey and was not unfrequently overcome by it. But in her following life as peddler, she measured her madness more, and much in the open air, and walking a great deal with a basket, sometimes heavy, her indulgence did her less physical harm. Her temper recovered a little. She regained a portion of her self-command. And at the close of those years of wandering, she was less of a ruin, both mentally and spiritually, than at their commencement, than at the beginning of it, right? When she received her £100 for the finding of Sir Gibbie, she rented a little shop in the gallery of the market, where she sold such things as she had carried about the country. And so there was a reward for someone who knew any of the whereabouts of Gibbie from the person whose inheritance it was. The man had died, had put a reward up for anyone that found him, and she knew where he was. So £100 back then was so much. She could buy a shop. Anyway, things she had carried about the country, adding to her stock upon the likelihood of demand, without respect to unity, either conventional or real, in the character of the wares she associated. The interest and respectability of this new start in life made a little fresh opposition to the inroads of her besetting sin, which was this whiskey, right? So that now she did not consume as much whiskey in 3 days as she did in one when she had her hoff on the shores. She had this whiskey house type of thing where people came to drink. Anyway, some people seem to have been drinking all their lives of necessity, getting more and more into the power of the enemy, but without succumbing at a rapid rate, having even their times of uplifting and betterment. Mistress Croll's complexion was a little clearer, her eyes were less fierce, her expression was more composed. Some of the women who, like her, had shops in the market had grown a little friendly with her, and which was of more valuable significance, she had come to be not a little regarded by the poor women of the lower parts behind the market, who were in the way of dealing with her, for the moment a customer of this class, and she had but few of any other, appeared at her shop or covered stall. Rather, she seemed in spirit to go outside the counter and buy with her, giving her the best counsel she had, now advising the cheaper, now the dearer of the two articles, while now and then one could tell of having been sent by her to another shop, where in the particular case she could do better. So she helped the poor people, right? The love of affairs, no doubt, bore a part in this peculiarity, but there is all the difference between the two ways of embodying activity, to one's own advantage only, and to the advantage of one's neighbor as well. For my part, if I knew a woman behave to her neighbors as Mistress Croll did to hers, were she the worst of drunkards in between, I could not help both respecting and loving her. Alas, that such virtue is so portentously scarce. There are so many that are sober for one that is honest. Deep are the depths of social degradation, to which the clean, purifying light yet reaches, and lofty are the heights of social honor, where yet the light is nothing but darkness. Any thoughtful person who knew Mistress Croale's history would have feared much for her and hoped a little. Her so-called fate was still undecided. In the meantime, she made a living and did not get into debt, spent an inordinate portion on her profits in drink, but had regained and was keeping up a kind and measure of respectability. Here, Leah. Just a second. Here. Let me give her water. Here's her water. Do you want your water? Do you want any water? She had a lot when we first got here. There's a cicada going. Before they reached the woody hill, Donald, with the open heart of the poet, was full of friendliness to her and rejoiced in the mischance that had led him to make her acquaintance, right? We call it a mischance, but it's really, God's providence in this book. Of course, he happened to say, that Gibbie's with Mr. Sclater. Well enough, she answered. I have seen him too. But he's grown a gentleman, and I wouldn't like to be affronted laying claim till there's an acquaintance, welcome as he once was to my house. She had more reason for the doubt and hesitation she thus expressed than Donald knew, but his answer was none the less the true one as regarded his friend. Ye little know Gibbie, then, he said. If you think he's going to look down upon anyone because of their social status, right? Go you to the minister's door and ask for him. He'll be down the stair like a shot. But deed you maybe he's come back to my chamber? No, you'll come in the stair and see. No, I wouldn't do that, Mistress Croale, who did not wish to face Mistress Murkinson, well known to her in the days of her comparative prosperity. She pointed out the door to him, but herself stood on the other side of the way till she saw it opened by her old friend in her nightcap, and heard her make jubilee over his return. Gibbie had come home and gone out again to look for him, she said. Well, remarked Donald, there would be a small guide in my going looking for him. It would be but sheep going to look for the shepherd. You're right there, said his landlady. Anyway, just sit you down still. We'll get you to your bed now, returned Donald. Let me see how your door works, and I'll let him in when he comes. Gibbie came within an hour, and all was well. They made their communication, of which Donald was far more interested, had their laugh over the affair, and went to bed. Okay, so this is chapter 43, XLIII, the minister's defeat. And I don't know if, I guess I'll read it because I go until 1 hour, so we have 3 more minutes or so. The minister's wrath, when he found he had been followed home by Gibbie, who yet would not enter the house, instantly rose in redoubled strength. He was ashamed to report the affair to Mrs. Sclater just as it had passed. He was but a married old bachelor, and fancied he must keep up his dignity in the eyes of his wife, not having yet learned that if a man be true, his friends and lovers will see to his dignity. So his anger went on smoldering all night and all through his sleep, without a touch of cool assuagement. Is that how you say that? And in the morning he rose with his temper very feverish. During breakfast he was gloomy, but would confess to no inward annoyance. What added to his unrest was that, although he felt insulted, he did not know what precisely the nature of the insult was. Even in his wrath, he could scarcely set down Gibbie's following of him to a glorying mockery of his defeat. Doubtless for a man, see how he's acting like Gibbie was trying to rub it in his face, when actually you'll see what happened. Hopefully today, let's see. Doubtless for a man accustomed to deal with affairs, to rule over a parish, for one who generally had his way in the kirk session, the church session, right, and to whom his wife showed becoming respect, it was scarcely fitting that the rude behavior of an ignorant country dummy should affect him so much. He ought to have been above such injury, but the lad whom he so regarded had first with his mere looks lowered him in his own eyes, then showed himself beyond the reach of his reproof by calmly refusing to obey him, then become unintelligible by following him like a creature over whom surveillance was needful. The more he thought of this last, the more inexplicable it seemed to become, except on the notion of deliberate insult. And the worst was that henceforth he could expect to have no power at all over the boy. If it was like this already, how would it be in the time to come? If, on the other hand, he were to re-establish his authority at the cost of making the boy hate him, then the moment he was of age, his behavior would be that of a liberated enemy. He would go straight to the dogs, and his money with him. The man of influence and scheme did well to be annoyed, right? He wanted him to have to share his money or some way or pay for it. I don't know what, I can't remember. Gibbie made his appearance at 10 o'clock and went straight to the study, where at that hour the minister was always waiting him. He entered with his own smile, bending his head in morning salutation. The minister said good morning, but gruffly and without raising his eyes from the last publication of the Spalding Club. So some club newsletter, right, or something it sounds like. Gibbie seated himself in his usual place, arranged his book and slate, and was ready to commence, when the minister, having now summoned resolution, lifted his head, fixed his eyes on him, and said sternly, "Sir Gilbert, what was your meaning in following me after refusing to accompany me?" Gibbie's face flushed. Mr. Sclater believed he saw him for the first time ashamed of himself. His hope rose, his courage grew, his augured victory and a reestablished throne, like he looked forward to that, right? His augured. He gathered himself up in dignity, prepared to overwhelm him, but Gibbie showed no hesitation. He took his slate instantly, found his pencil, wrote, and handed the slate to the minister. There stood these words, "I thought you was drunk," right? That's what he wrote down. That's what he was used to when people were angry like that. Mr. Sclater started to his feet, and the hand which held the offended document uplifted, his eyes flaming, his cheeks white with passion, and with the flat of the slate came down a great blow on the top of Gibbie's head. Happily, the latter was the harder of the two, and the former broke. The slate, the chalkboard thing, broke, flying mostly out of the frame. It took Gibbie terribly by surprise. Half stunned, he started to his feet, and for one moment the wild beast which was in him, as it is in everybody, rushed to the front of its cage. It would have gone ill then with the minister had not as sudden a change followed. The very same instant it was as if an invisible veil, woven of gracious air and odor and dew, had descended upon him. The flame of his wrath went out, quenched utterly. A smile of benignest compassion overspread his countenance. In his offender he saw only a brother. But Mr. Sclater saw no brother before him, for when Gibbie rose, he drew back to better his position, and so doing made it an awkward one indeed. For it happened occasionally that, the study being a warm room, Mrs. Sclater on a winter evening sat there with her husband, whence it came that on the floor squatted a low footstool, subject to not unfrequent clerical imprecation. When he stepped back, he trod on the edge of it, stumbled, and fell. Gibbie darted forward. A part of the minister's body rested upon the stool, and its elevation made the first movement necessary to rising rather difficult, so that he could not at once get off his back. What followed was the strangest act for a Scotch boy, but it must be kept in mind how limited were his means of expression. He jumped over the prostrate minister, who the next moment, seeing his face bent over him from behind, and seized, like the gamekeeper, with suspicion born of his violence, raised his hands to defend himself and made a blow at him. Gibbie avoided it, thank God, right? Laid hold of his arms inside each elbow, clamped them to the floor, kissed him on the forehead and cheek, and began to help him up like a child. Having regained his legs, the minister stood for a moment, confused and half-blinded. The first thing he saw was a drop of blood stealing down Gibbie's forehead. He was shocked at what he had done. In truth, he had been frightfully provoked, but it was not for a clergyman so to avenge an insult. As mere chastisement, it was brutal. What would Mrs. Sclater say to it? The rascal was sure to make his complaint to her, and there too was his friend, the herd lad, in the drawing-room with her. "Go and wash your face," he said, "and come back again directly." Gibbie put his hand to his face, and feeling something wet, looked and burst into a merry laugh. "I am sorry I have hurt you," said the minister, not a little relieved at the sound. "But how dared you write such an insolence? A clergyman never gets drunk." Gibbie picked up the frame which the minister had dropped in his fall, A piece of the slate was still sticking on one side, and he wrote upon it, "I will know better the next time. I thought it was always whiskey that made people like that. I beg your pardon, sir." Wow, that's a good place to stop. Okay, so this chapter is called The Minister's Defeat, as we just began to see. All right, I hope you come along with me next. I plan for it to be next week, but anyway, I'll take my hat off for a second. I wish you much love and happiness. Happiness, true happiness, joy, right? Much love.